In today's video tutorial, I just want to show you what a gradient is and how you can easily create one in Adobe Photoshop. So all a gradient is the gradual transition between two or more colors, and it's quite easy to create in Photoshop by simply going down the left-hand side of your page in your toolbox and selecting your gradient tool. If you can't see that gradient tool, it could be hiding underneath the paint bucket tool. So all you need to do is press and hold your left mouse button and select the gradient tool, or you can press the letter G for the shortcut until the gradient tool appears. And with the gradient tool selected, all you need to do is go and click, drag a line on the page and drop it. And you've got yourself a gradient. You can see my two colors here, the dark blue and the light blue, gradually fading from one to the other. Now you can do it the opposite direction to get a different looking gradient. You can go up and down. You can go on diagonals. It's up to you how you want your gradient to look. Now, as you can see, I'm stretching this line out quite a long way, which creates a fairly soft transition between the two colors. If you want a harsher transition, draw a small line, and you can see the colors very abruptly transition from one to the other. Okay, I like the softer look though, so I'm going to keep my gradient line fairly long. Now, some other cool things you can do with your gradient is have a look up the top here in the properties panel, and we can play around with the 5 different types of gradients. The first one that we've been playing with is called the linear gradient. But next to that, if you select the radial gradient and click and drag, I guess you get this radial or circular looking effect. Okay, so you can do little ones, you can do big ones, it's up to you. Next to it, we've got a fairly harsh looking one. This one here is the angle gradient. So you can get different angles. I don't really like that one. It's pretty bit harsh, I guess, where it changes between the two colors. Coming in next, we've got the reflective one. If you draw a long line, you're not really going to see the reflection take place, but if you draw a small line, you'll see the reflection. So wherever you draw your line, either side, you'll have a reflection. And the last one, we've got a diamond, which is similar to the radial gradient. It just makes a kind of diamond effect though through the middle. So the smaller the line, the smaller the effect. The bigger the line, the bigger the effect. To me though, I stick with linear gradients. I think they look the best, so I'm just going to stick with my linear gradient for now. Okay, now to change the color of your gradient, it's quite easy to do. You can pop up the top here and hit the little drop down box and play around with the basic gradients first of all. The first option you've got here are the two colors you've got selected down here. Okay, so if I was to change that to say red and a yellowy kind of color, I'd go up here now, and now I've got the red and yellow selected. So if I draw another gradient, I've now got reds and yellows transitioning from one to the other. You can also choose the second option here, which is your first color that you've chosen down here, the top color. I think they call it foreground color. And that fades into transparency, which is that little dashed checkerboard there. It's not really going to work for me right now because I've got a few different layers with stuff on them there, but you can have a gradient that fades from one color into transparency by selecting that option. And the last one is just a simple black and white. Okay, not much to it. You'll also notice that there's other presets below the basics there. So you've got your blues, your purples, all sorts of different colors there, cloudy effects. These iridescent ones look kind of cool. So have a play around with those if you would like and see what different colors you can choose. They're just the basics. If you want to get a bit more fancy though and have a bit of control over the colors you're choosing, what you can do is just click on this color box, not the little arrow, the drop down box, hit the color itself and the gradient editor panel comes up. Okay, so we've got our gradient color box down the bottom here. What you can do is select the little color box on the left first of all and go and choose yourself a new color. So I might choose, I'm going to go back to the blues for a moment. Down the other end of the scale, I choose the color I want it to fade into. So I click on that little color box and come down to my color here, and I might choose a green this time. And there's my new gradient. But to get a little bit more fancy, you can actually add more colors to your gradient. All you need to do is click somewhere beneath this color box. So if I click in the gray section just here, I can add a third color to my gradient. So I might add a yellow in here. And I can actually move this around to get different effects on my gradient. Okay, so I could put that in the middle. If you wanted to add more, you could always go and add more. So here's another one. I might go and change it to orange. So you could make a whole myriad of colors here. You could make all the colors of the rainbow if you wanted to. But that gives you a bit of an idea on what you can do for gradients. If I click OK and go and draw that now, you can see that looks pretty cool as well. Now if I go back and say I want to remove the orange from my gradient, all I need to do is just click on this little color stop, drag it down, and it disappears. And then I can adjust those colors to make it look a little bit better and redraw it. Okay, so you get the idea on how we can make our own custom gradients. Now I'm just going to go back and click up there one more time, because another thing I want to show you very quickly is the transparency of colors. At either end of the scale up the top here, you've got blacks, which means we've got 100% opacity, which means we can fully see the color. If we were to click on one of those little transparency sliders, whoops, we don't change that, we want to change the opacity, we can drop it down. So it becomes a little bit more transparent as we draw our gradient. So as you can see here, we've got this fully black transparency slider, or stop, whatever you want to call it. That means we can fully see that blue color. But as we work our way down the scale here, it becomes transparent. So I might change that transparent to 0%. So at the other end of the scale, it fully fades out, and we can't even see the greens and barely see the yellows as we draw them. I don't think it's going to work too well here because I've already got colors drawn beneath it, but it gives you a bit of an idea on how you can use transparency in your gradients as well. I might just turn that back up to 100%. So that's about all you really need to know with the gradient editor. I guess if you really like a gradient that you've created, you might want to use it again further down the track. You can give it a name. So I might call it Custom Rainbow and click New. And that just saves into your presets up here, and you can drag that into any of the folders up there if you would like. You don't have to, but that's just an option. So if we click on OK, we are all done with the gradients there. Now to show you something else with gradients, this could be our background for our artwork, I guess, but we can also apply gradients to things like text. So if we grab our type tool over here, and I might just go and choose a thicker font. So what's Franklin Gothic Heavy look like? Yeah, we'll call it, actually I'll write the word gradient. So I'm going to write the word gradient in the middle of my page there, and I'm going to go over to my layers panel here. And where I've got the word gradient, I can go down to effects and add a gradient overlay. This brings up your layer style panel, and you can already see there's a gradient being applied. But it's up to you how you control that gradient. Okay, you can change it to any of those different kinds that we said before, like radial or radial, linear, angled, reflective, whatever you want. I'm just going to stick with linear for now to keep it simple. You can change your colors again. We've got all the presets. I might go for a pastel preset here and see if it looks any good. Oh yeah, it's alright, we'll stick with that. You can also go in and click on this color bar and adjust it like we were doing before. Remember, we're adding our own colors to it. So let's go and add a real soft yellow to this pastel-y look. That's not too bad. So we'll click on OK, and you can see that working nicely. You can change the angle of your gradient. Okay, play around with the different angles. I'll try and move this to the side so you can see what's happening. I think the vertical angle here will look good, so I'm just going to leave it roughly around there. Scale it up and down. You can change different settings there. It's just a matter of playing to see what you think of it. One other thing I might add here is just a little drop shadow behind it so it stands out a little bit more, but we don't care about drop shadows. We just are concerned with gradients for now. Alright, so there is our gradient added to text. One other thing you could possibly do as well is pop on over to a photo. And with a photo, I guess you could go to your layers here as well, make yourself a new layer, and draw a gradient on. So I'm just going to draw that rainbow gradient across here, and change the blend mode. Okay, so we've got all the different blend modes over here in our layers panel. So we've got dissolve, doesn't do much, darken, multiply, color, and just a matter of scrolling through them to see what looks kind of cool. So some of them looked pretty rad, some of them looked a bit weird. That looks pretty cool. So find one that you like the looks of. I don't mind the look of that. And if you want, you can drop the opacity a little bit so it's not quite as harsh. It's up to you what sort of effect you want, but you can apply those different gradient effects to your photos to get different looks. Okay, so that's another option you have up your sleeve. Alright, so that's all gradients are. We've learned how to basically make a background with a gradient. We've learned how to put it on text. We've also learned how we can apply them to photos. So that's the basics of gradients. Go and get creative, and I'd love to see what artworks you can come up with.